Oh, hell no!
Hey everyone, it's Failed Shot back at it with an Awaken Chaos Era video, and as you saw from our intro, I got a ton of requests on making this Desmond guide, so here it is. I am really enjoying Desmond personally. He's becoming one of my favorite characters, really fun to theory craft with. I have a ton of gameplay to show you because I've been running him on stream, and I will leave timestamps in the description down below so you can kind of, check out what you want to check out with Desmond. On top of that, I will be rating him for every game mode, be going over the many builds you can run on him, and also, my personal overall impressions and whether or not he's worth building. If you are enjoying this series, be sure to leave a like on this video and drop a comment on who you want to see next. And of course, subscribe just so you're not missing any of the in-depth guides. And we're going to go ahead and head right into Desmond's stats. So the first thing is his B attack rating. So this doesn't matter all that much depending on what build you're running on him. If you're running the build I'm running on him, which I will discuss later, the B attack starts to matter a little bit, but it's a solid attack for being such a heavily focused on defensive character. You have an S health, which matters quite a bit, especially with the builds we're going to be running on later. A defense, which is really nice as well, keeping him nice and survivable. A speed is actually a really solid speed number. It's not really over the top, but it's a really solid because Desmond wants to go first in front of the enemies. Not necessarily in front of your team, but definitely in front of the enemies, and you'll see why later when we discuss his abilities. And then we have a B crit rate, which actually matters a little bit depending on what build you're running on him. And then we are going to go into his abilities. So the first ability is the trait, and this trait is pretty much useless. The game modes that you're going to be wanting to run him in, the trait does not have any effect in those game modes pretty much at all. And what the trait does is, if the enemy removes plague, there's a 15% chance to apply stun for 1 turn. And if you have the Ascension 5, which is going to be pretty much impossible for most of you out there, you're going to have a 30% chance to stun. So this doesn't really matter at all. You can pretty much completely ignore this for the most part. And we're going to head right into the basic, and that is 80% damage and heals for 10% of his missing HP, which is really solid, especially since you'll see why he's losing so much HP later on. And then we have the first special, which is applies Plague to all enemies, and Plague deals damage based on the enemy's current HP at the start of the turn, and also has a max of 50 stacks. And then he deals 100% damage to each enemy, and the damage scales with the number of stacks of Plague on each target. So remember, you can get 50 stacks on each person, and this ability can do quite a bit of damage if you are stacking a ton of Plague on the enemies. And it's important to note it scales with the number of Plague stacks, not necessarily with attack percentage or anything like that. It does scale with attack percentage, but not all that much. And the really thing you want to worry about is the Plague stacking, because once this gets a ton of Plague out, this ability does quite a bit of damage. And then we have the ultimate. So the ultimate enters a state of Plague Emissary until canceled. So what does Plague Emissary do? Well, it applies Plague to the enemy at the start of their turn. So this is why you want him to go first before the enemies, because if he's not in Plague Emissary stance, he's not going to be applying Plague to the enemies at the start of their turn. On top of that, if they have Plague already, they have a 100% chance, which is the recent buff to Desmond, to spread Plague to another random enemy. And so if they have, let's say, 1 or 2 stacks, they will put those 1 or 2 stacks on another random enemy, including it could be themselves, and then gain the +1 stack from the Plague Emissary. So this is where it starts to become exponentially quick to spread Plague. The first couple of turns are pretty bad, but then once you get to maybe 4 or 5 stacks, that could turn into 10 and then maybe 20, and then you're moving 20 stacks to another person. And remember, every single person spreads Plague themselves. So let's say if there's 4 people out there with 4 stacks, well then 4 times 4 is going to be spread around the battlefield. Not only that, but it could also spread to someone that's later on in the turn order, and then they could maybe spread 8 stacks of Plague. It's a little confusing, but I'm going to be going over them in campaign and show you exactly what I mean. So that's pretty much it for Desmond's stats. On top of that, I did want to mention that Plague Emissary will also drain his own HP because he will drain his own HP based on the amount of Plagues out there and how long he's in Plague Emissary stance. So be careful with that, which is why I say that health really gets drained quickly, and which is why you also need the basic healing. So this also changes the gear that you're going to run on him. So we're going to go ahead and go into the different builds. So this one's a really interesting one. But I'm going to go over the initial build that I suggest running on a very basic build if you do not want to kind of experiment a little bit. And that is just a pure revival HP set. And we could just check here with maybe speed to get ahead of people. I would highly recommend running Revival on him, whatever build you run, because he does need a little extra healing oftentimes to keep himself alive from killing himself from his own ultimate ability. That being said, I think you should always run HP percent on him because it will increase the Revival healing as well as keeping him a little bit more tanky. You can also run defense percent if you want. And so the first build, as I said, just pure tankiness, pure Revival, just trying to get that Plague out there, and then purely relying on Plague, and then supplementing him with additional damage with the rest of the team. Now, the build I have found that I really, really enjoy is actually a crit rate tank hybrid. So you can see here I have a crit rate ring. Desmond, for me, has 101% crit rate. Decent crit damage. It's not great at all, but it is like there. And of course, really, really high on HP to get those revival stacks. Not a lot of attack at all, as you can see. Now, you can run him with more attack. It will be harder to keep him alive, but the other attack will increase his damage slightly. And again, as I mentioned previously with the second ability, the reason why we're running crit rate on him is because the damage scales off of Plague, you can crit with it and then drastically increase your damage more so than we could when increasing attack. So that's really important to note. If you wanted him to do a ton of damage, you can see raising your crit damage will increase that damage by quite a bit. Now, a question I get asked for Desmond is, do you need focus? I would highly recommend you get as much focus as you can, because it does increase that chance of landing the Plague. And although you have a ton of chances, and some of the things don't rely necessarily on resistance and focus, there is a lot of extra Plague that you can get out if you run them on high focus. I only have 40% with my gear, but I would highly recommend that you get as much focus as possible in general in order to get as much Plague out there. So that pretty much wraps up the builds themselves. A little additional note is if you want to get as much agility on him as possible to deflect attacks, that also helps him quite a bit. So we're going to go ahead and head into campaign, just a showcase of his skills, and I'll give you a rating for campaign with Desmond. So here we are, we're jumping into campaign right now, and I'm just running Desmond solo just to show you exactly what Desmond is capable of. Again, I have him sped up a little bit so that he can try to go before the enemies. Obviously, I would like him a little bit more speed if I can get it. And we're just going to go ahead and enter the Plague Emissary stance. So you'll see when the enemies take a turn, they're going to get a stack of Plague. So check this out. One stack when that Goblin goes, another stack when the Sandworm goes, another stack, and another stack. So you can see there, he is getting a ton of stacks on the enemies. Now, with this, you can also apply this second ability, which will apply another Plague to the enemies, and it will also deal a decent amount of damage. Now, I will try to show you the amount of damage you can do later on with this skill, but let's go ahead and just apply that stack of Plague, and now you can see there's 2. So we're already doing like 2k damage, as you saw there. And as you can see, these characters are getting 5 stacks of Plague. That one got 5 because their Plague is actually spreading amongst each other. And we're just going to go ahead and hit here. And then, again, we apply another stack. But now you can see there's 21 stacks. It just spreads like wildfire. Obviously, it's a little hard to keep up because there's a lot of Plague going on. But I do want to show you kind of some of the damage potential you could see out of Desmond when you have a ton of Plague out there. So we're going to go ahead and not use our first special here. We're going to let that Plague stack up to 50. So you can see there's 50 on one of those sandworms. There's only 8 on that one because it's not spreading to that one. But we got another 50 there. And we can just go ahead and show off. But as you can see, he's taking a ton of damage from that revival set, or from the Plagues out. And he's basically killing himself. But this damage is a little surprising. Check this out. 13k on the water and 7k on the fire. Really, really solid damage, to be honest. And I was really impressed to see that. And that's why I highly recommend a crit build if you can get it. Little hybrid tanky stats with the crit build is really, really solid. Now, I do rate Desmond as a 3 to a 4 in campaign. And the reason for this is he takes too long to stack up. And as you can see, because we've been in Plague Emissary stance for too long, he took a ton of damage at the start of his turn. And you just want to get through campaign as quick as possible, so Desmond is definitely not the way to go here. So let's go ahead and check him out in Arena. This one's pretty simple. Here we are in Arena, and I do not think you should be using him in Arena at all. I have him rated as a 2 for Arena defense and a 2 for Arena offense. You can even argue that he's maybe a 1 or a 0. I do think that he has a little tiny bit of damage, which prevents him from being, an absolute 0 if you run him in the crit rate build, but it's nothing. You should definitely not be running him in Arena. Let's go ahead and head over to Void Tower. So here we are. I happened to get to Void Tower 68 Honestly, with a mix between Desmond and another comp I've been running that's a little more burst damage focused, but I was actually stuck on, I believe it was 61 or 62, and I could not get through it. That was where I got stuck on last reset. And with Desmond, as I will show you in just a second, we were able to clear through that on stream. It took a ton of time, and I do want to say that he is not great for every single, floor. This is very situational. I do have him rated as a 10 because I think he is absolutely amazing and very, very consistent in those situations. But if the enemies have a ton of healing, or if they have cleanses, he is not useful at all. His plague will not outdamage healing most of the time, and if his plague gets cleansed, then he cannot win at all because, he can't stack up that plague, he can't get a ton of damage out, he can't get that scaling damage with his second or his first special. So it's super, super important to use him in the right situation, but it's definitely very, very good in the right situation. So she's going to have a ton of plague here, 37 stacks, but it's just not enough. So she's going to heal here. She heals to like full. Yeah, she cleanses. That's the problem. She cleanses and heals. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the problem, is like Desmond's worst enemy is the cleanse. We gotta try again. Oh no, I can't beat. As far as I know, I don't have the ability to beat this without using Desmond. Like I've tried other ways. This is the stage I got stuck on last reset. Yeah, I think everyone agrees. Agile Leap. Karzak says it's 2. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know. This is exciting anyways. I love using Desmond. He's so fun. All right, so here what I think we do is we go ahead and taunt Melisa. Okay, because Marion's gonna do her big attack here, and it will do quite a bit of damage. So we just need a little bit more time to survive. Just need a little bit more time. So let's go ahead and heal up Desmond. So we're gonna keep hitting Hackrin. We want to avoid as many stacks as possible from Hackrin because last time we got 3 stacks of the max HP. We're actually really close to killing Marion here. She's gonna cleanse herself though, so it's not even gonna matter. So here's what we do. We go ahead and boost Methasia. Try to keep Desmond alive. 108. Come on. Come on, Methasia, you got this. Yes. Okay, so now there's only 2 stacks of max HP, which should help us. And then we can just go after Marion. We're gonna keep keeping the plague on Vidar over here. So you can see there, you spread the plague to Marion, and now she has 9 stacks. That's kind of the reason why we want to keep one of them alive, because we can start stacking the plague on one over here and then immediately transfer it over to Marion. Obviously, it's kind of random, so can't really control it too much. But so I believe she heals off of her ultimate, even though it says applies Unholy Redemption, and it says after in the box. I think she heals off of her ultimate. So let's just do some math real quick. This is a 3-turn cooldown, right? So if we use this, and then we go ahead and taunt... We go ahead and taunt Marion. She's not going to use this ability. And then it'll be her ultimate. So that would be out to 2 turns. And then use the ultimate 1 turn. Okay, this should be... We should be able to use this right now. And then... be able to Agile Leap. Between the taunt from Hacker and the Agile Leap, we should be able to use it again to finish her off. So let's see if this works. Oh, we are so close. Come on, Desmond. You got this. You got this, Desmond. Come on. He's 1 turn away. No. You got this. Don't heal too much. I think... I mean, I'm pretty sure she heals, right? Okay. Ooh, that's a lot. Ooh, so here's, I think, what we do. We basic. We swap to Hackrin. We taunt. We let her take a turn, take another 1800 damage, and then we go for the kill. Come on. Yes! Look at the damage. We are officially higher than I've ever been in Void Tower. So as you saw on the stream, we were able to complete that floor. It took 2 tries, but we were able to finish it. Even though Marion had that cleanse and that extra healing, we were able to time it perfectly to make sure those plagues are stacking correctly. It took a little bit of thinking, but we were able to finish it. And you can see how strong Desmond can be with those damage charts at the end. It's very, very impressive, although, you know, a little bit inflated sometimes. So let's go ahead and head over to Guild Boss. So here we are at the guild boss, and I have him rate him as a 4 for the fire, a 1 for the water, and a 6 for the wood. And the main reason for that is the water boss actually cleanses itself, so he's completely useless in the water boss. Now, the wood and the fire is actually quite decent if you can run him with, perhaps an additional damage dealer, like someone like Cyrus for the wood one, for example, that can accelerate you later on into these later chests so that he can actually start dealing a ton of damage with his plague, similar to poisons. However, oftentimes he's just worse than a flat-out really solid single target fire damage dealer in wood, for example. And he's also very, very hard to keep alive because he kills himself, and on top of that, on fire he's the wrong affinity. So I will show you a little bit of the end clip of one of my guild boss runs with Desmond and, a couple other characters. That way you can see kind of the damage potential, and this did end up being, I think, a level 21 chest. So it wasn't that terrible, but if you are able to get to those higher level chests, you can do a significant amount of damage, way more than he was doing on a level 20 chest. So I went ahead and skipped to the end screen so you can actually see the damage. And as I said, he's rated about a 6 for the wood and a 4 for the fire. And the reason for this is you really need to get to those higher HP thresholds for the boss in order for Desmond's Plague to start hitting for 4, 10, maybe 15k. And you kind of run an awkward comp. And again, don't use him in water because he gets cleansed and his Plague does absolutely nothing. So really useless there. But he does do quite a bit of damage with his Plague if you can get to higher stages. Now, if you are surviving and you are able to get to those much higher stages, he could potentially be one of your better damage dealers, but certainly not for the earlier game. And let's go ahead and head over to Endless Trials. So here we are at Endless Trials, and I pretty simply have him rated as a 2. And the reason for this is he kills himself with that HP loss from his own Plague. It's not a long fight, so he can't stack up the plagues, and then he starts the next fight with even lower HP, so you can't even stack the plague even higher than previous battles. So I would not recommend you use them in Endless Trials. Let's go ahead and head over to the dungeons. So here we are at the dungeons, and this is where it gets really interesting for Desmond yet again. He's absolutely atrocious in some game modes, but he's really solid in the dungeons and in Void Tower, I think, very specifically. And the reason for this is, of course, the bosses have a ton of HP, and they're typically longer fights, unless you're running a speed comp. And that is important to note. Desmond is not a fast character, so if you want to speed up your runs, don't be using Desmond. I personally use him I've been experimenting with Tulpa and been using him in Queens personally. And so I've rated him as a 7 for Tulpa, a 2 for Ash, and a 10 for Queens. He dies way too quickly in Ash. If you're able to keep him alive, he might be better, but I have not been able to at all. So, maybe there's some really high gear requirements for him, but again, at that point, just use a speed comp. In Queen, if you can use Zatlux, but the gear requirement for Zatlux and the rest of your team is going to be a little higher than if you were to use Desmond, and Desmond will speed up your run quite a bit from previous iterations of my free-to-play comp. Now, obviously, he's not a free-to-play character, but if you happen to have Desmond and you're building the free-to-play comp, slot Desmond in for the place of Radira, and you can absolutely have some success with there, and I will show you my team later on. Now, Tulpa is very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and jump into Tulpa right now and actually show you why I have him rated as a 7. So I can't run 12 personally because I am running Santis and Hakron. Hakron's not 6-star, and they just die too quickly. Now, Tulpa doesn't have the shield actually activate until 50% HP, and so that's super important to note because Desmond's Plague does damage based on current HP, and so because the shield is something that you actually want to get to, because if you don't get to, your whole team dies, essentially, you need a little bit of extra damage somewhere else in order to get through that shield oftentimes. And also, Desmond will not be able to kill off the characters, or the boss, rather, alone because, again, he's doing current HP damage when the boss will oftentimes be at like maybe 10%, and it's not actually doing a ton of damage. So I bring in someone like Santis. You can bring in perhaps another damage dealer, or, Valuk or something like that, and that may be successful, but I don't have the resources to build out Valuk right now, so I don't have him running in my personal comp, but I think Desmond can have a lot of viability in Tulpa. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the boss where we can show off exactly what I'm talking about here. So here we are at the boss, and as you can see, we've been stacking up the Plague. Now, I've run this quite a few times, and I've not lost, but I'm almost 100% that this is not a 100% team. Now, I haven't rated him as a 7. As you can see there, he actually did 9k to the boss, and we popped the shield, but he's just so hard to get to work. I'd rather just, use a standard poison comp to beat Tulpa, which you can do, and I'll show you that hopefully in the next week or so on my team that I'm going to be building for Tulpa. But this is just like really, really difficult and oftentimes really slow. So there's oftentimes better ways to spend your resources. So I remain him as a 7 because you can use him. He's just not necessarily the best to use in this situation. And this looks like perhaps it's going to be a fail. There goes the shield, and there goes the hit, and it's just Desmond alive. I guess Hackran ended up surviving. But you can see there that the Plague's just not getting through the shield because the HP is too low. It did 6k damage there, and we weren't able to spread Plague to the boss. So he does a decent amount of damage, and I'll show you his damage report. So he does a ton of damage over all the dungeon runs, as you'll see. But it's just not enough because he does current HP damage rather than max HP damage. So he can be used in Tulpa. Just keep that in mind. You can build a comp with Desmond, but he's not super easy to get to work. So let's go ahead and head over to Queen 12, where I can show you my current comp and, basically why I'm running this comp, because it's actually much faster than my previous comp, which was double healer and Desmond. So I'm running the same comp pretty much exactly. I ended up ascensioning to Hackran because he was just a little too squishy. Without additional healing, Hackran was ended up dying. But pretty much the same rules apply. Desmond has the highest damage here, so he's going to be getting hit by the stun from the boss, which doesn't matter too much because he's going to be applying Plague whether or not he's stunned or not, if he's in the Plague Emissary stance. And again, it's going to be a slower comp because it takes a while to get going. So if you have Zatlux, this exact comp, but with Zatlux instead of Desmond, can work really, really well. Also, Valuk is a very excellent poisoner, and you can slot him in as well, which, probably will give you similar times as Desmond. So just keep those in mind. Desmond, again, is very difficult to get to work, and I think the true area of the game that he shines in is Void Tower, but he can work in the dungeons quite well. It's just going to be much, much slower than a lot of people's preferences. So I'm going to go ahead and let this play out, and I'm just going to, meet you at the boss where we will kind of show off where Desmond's, damage comes in. So here we are in the boss fight, and we're a little bit into it where the Plague has already gotten to stack, and it's been about, I want to say like 5 or so minutes, but you can see there, it actually did like 43k damage on the Queen with only 27 stacks, and Desmond just happens to kill pretty much every one of them here because obviously the Plague is random. So it's really, really impressive actually how much damage Desmond can do. As you can see from the side ad, the left one, it just did 37k damage. And this is really what Desmond shines at, is just stacking up those Plagues and dealing massive, massive damage. Again, 33k hit to the boss. He is very, very, he kills himself quite often, but he's also the wood element, so he doesn't actually die all that often in this stage. Now you do need some decent healing and some decent, perhaps revival gear on him in order to complete this. I'm not quite sure. I have not run him without revival gear personally, because I do not think that you should be running him without revival gear. So keep that in mind. And we're just going to keep running this, and I'm going to show you the damage charts at the end. So here we are back, and he's got 47 stacks of Plague, but you can see there it only did 9k damage, and that's because she's much lower in HP. And overall, Desmond did quite a bit of damage, and I'll show you here in the damage charts. Boom, look at that, 500k damage, 4 times as much as Santis, and this is why he's speeding up my runs so much. So would highly recommend, if you already have Desmond built out and you're struggling on Queen, then just slot Desmond in, run him with healers and Hackran, and you should be having some success there. So let's go ahead and wrap this up with the potion value and the ability crystals. So here we are in the ability crystal dungeons, and I have them rated as a 3 for Bane Wraith, a 2 for the Lizard, a 4 for the Flood, and a 3 for the Captive and the Light Dungeon. There's nothing really special here. Just don't use them in these modes, I think. Oftentimes you want to get through these quick. He's going to stall them out. Just use a on-element character and you should be fine for the most part. Let's go ahead and go over his potion value. So here we are on the Ascension menu, and the first reason why I have this potion value rated as a 1 is because he's Ascension 5, so it takes forever to get to the trait basically upgrade. And the trait is absolutely terrible because, for one, you're going to be wanting to use them in Void Tower, so you cannot stun. So literally, the trait doesn't actually do anything. Second thing is you don't want to remove Plague because you want it to keep stacking, so that's not necessarily good. And also, if you're using them in dungeons, again, you're going to be stacking that Plague, and the only characters you can stun are the, mini waves beforehand, so it doesn't matter at all. So really, the only thing you're talking about is these stats right here. And would you want to use your legendary potions on simply stats? Probably not. Now, the stats are, really solid on Desmond, but I do not think he's worth putting any Ascensions into him, to be honest, unless you pull copies of him. So let's go ahead and give my overall thoughts on Desmond and wrap up. So I have Desmond rated as an overall rating of 3.82, or a 4 if you exclude the potion value. Now, again, as someone mentioned, they wanted to see the rating without the potion value included, and so there it is. Now, he is rated really, really, really lowly, and that's because, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, is he's absolutely terrible in certain game modes. Now, don't let that discourage you from actually building Desmond, and the reason for this is he is absolutely amazing to progress through certain stages of the Void Tower. Hard and Mythic, I've seen Eatup use him in his streams, and he has just been cruising along, and I myself have used him several times in certain stages, and he has been very consistent, very, very solid. Again, you can also use him in the dungeons, specifically Tulpa and Queen. Now, the one thing is, he's kind of like an interesting one because he's difficult to build in general, and used for like certain endgame content, but he's very, very slow, which makes you not necessarily want to build him for your endgame dungeons, unless, of course, it's your first time going through those dungeons. So just keep that in mind. I think he's a solid character. I think a lot of people, if you have completed most of the beginning game content and farming stage 12, you should be absolutely building for Void Tower. Getting that clear on 100 hard and maybe 20 mythic if you get to that point is super, super important. So I think Desmond is a for sure must build if you are clearing, your stage 12 dungeons and anything that's beneath that, like the campaign and endless trials. I think everyone should be building out their Desmond and then slotting them into their comps, specifically the tankier healing comps, and you can for sure clear some of the stages. Now, if you're having no problem with Void Tower, don't build them. But if you are having problems with Void Tower, Desmond will help you in certain stages. So that's pretty much it. And if you want to see your champion featured, be sure to let me know in the comments which character that is, and I will be sure to try and go ahead and get that video out for you all. And make sure you like the video and subscribe, and I will see you for the next one.